Okay, so you want to build the Great Wall of China. Find some land, hire some workers, stack some bricks. Simple enough, right? But here's the thing. The Great Wall isn't really a wall. It's not even one wall. It's closer to 30 walls built across 16 centuries by at least 6 different dynasties, using 3 completely different construction technologies and an estimated 1 million people who never went home. And somehow, after all of that, historians still can't agree on how long it actually is. But what nobody ever asks, what nobody ever sits down and actually calculates, is what this thing cost. Not in ancient copper coins or bushels of rice. In real money. Today's money. Because when you run those numbers, the Great Wall of China isn't just the most famous construction project in human history. It might be the most expensive thing a human civilization has ever deliberately chosen to build. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what it cost to build it, who actually paid for it, whether it ever made that money back, and why the most powerful empire on Earth kept pouring resources into something that, by most military historians' accounts, didn't really work. Let's start at the beginning. The year is 221 BC. Qin Shi Huang has just done something no one in Chinese history had managed to do before. He unified 7 warring kingdoms into one empire. And almost immediately, he had a problem. Not an internal problem, a northern problem. The Xiongnu, a confederation of nomadic warrior tribes who lived on the Mongolian steppe, rode horses better than anyone alive, and had spent centuries raiding Chinese settlements for food, livestock, and slaves. And the thing about nomadic raiders is that you can't negotiate with them easily. You can't tax them. You can't absorb them into your bureaucracy. The only thing you can do is build a wall. So that's what he did. Now here's where the economics get interesting immediately. Qin Shi Huang didn't build the Great Wall from scratch. He connected existing walls. 3 of the warring kingdoms, Qin, Zhao, and Yun, had already built their own defensive walls along their northern borders. Qin Shi Huang's general, Meng Tian, connected and extended those walls using an estimated 300,000 soldiers and somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 conscripted laborers, all at the same time. Let that number sit with you for a second. 700,000 workers. That's roughly the entire population of Washington, D.C., all digging, hauling, and stacking stone in the mountains of northern China, simultaneously. And this is where the costs start to become almost incomprehensible. Labor is always the biggest line item in any construction project. Today, a general laborer on a major infrastructure project in the United States earns around $18 to $25 per hour. Now we're not going to pretend ancient China used dollars. But economists have developed something called labor value equivalency, where you calculate the cost of feeding, housing, equipping, and managing a workforce and convert it into modern purchasing power. When researchers at Wuhan University attempted this calculation in 2012, they estimated that the total labor cost of the Qin dynasty wall alone, just the first major phase, would be equivalent to somewhere between $360 billion and $500 billion in today's money. And that's just the workers. That doesn't include materials. That doesn't include military escort. That doesn't include the supply chain. Here's the thing about building in mountains. You can't just order a delivery. Every single brick, every bag of lime, every wooden plank, every iron tool had to be physically carried to wherever the wall was being built. And the wall wasn't built in convenient flatlands near a river port. It was built on ridgelines. It was built on 45-degree slopes. It was built in places so remote and so harsh that the logistics of feeding the workforce was arguably harder than the construction itself. Historical records from the Qin dynasty, specifically the Shiji, describe supply convoys so long they stretched for miles, and grain losses from rot, theft, and transportation accidents that regularly exceeded 30% of total supplies. In modern logistics terms, a 30% spoilage rate would bankrupt any company within a quarter. But empires don't go bankrupt the same way companies do. They just tax harder. And Qin Shi Huang taxed extremely hard. To fund the wall, alongside his other mega projects, including a 700-room palace and a terracotta army tomb complex that itself cost what economists estimate as $2 to $3 billion in today's money. Qin Shi Huang implemented one of the most aggressive taxation systems in ancient history. Land taxes, labor taxes, merchant taxes, taxes on the production of salt and iron, which were the oil and steel of the ancient world. Farmers who couldn't pay in grain paid in time, required to give the state between 1 and 3 months of mandatory labor per year. It was essentially a subscription model, except you didn't get to cancel it, and the consequences of non-payment were considerably worse than a strongly worded email. The total annual revenue of the Qin dynasty at its peak is estimated by economic historians at roughly the equivalent of $8 to $12 billion in modern terms. And a significant chunk of that, some historians argue as much as 40% during peak construction years, went directly into wall-related spending. For context, The United States currently spends about 3.5% of GDP on national defense. Qin Shi Huang was reportedly spending closer to 15 to 20% of his empire's entire economic output on northern fortification alone. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the Qin Wall? That's just chapter 1, the wall that most people picture when they think of the Great Wall. The photogenic, brick-and-mortar, watchtower-studded wall snaking across green mountains. That's not the Qin Wall. That's the Ming Wall. And it's a completely different economic story. Fast forward to 1368 AD. The Ming dynasty has just overthrown the Mongols, reunified China, and now faces a very familiar problem: nomadic raiders from the north. Specifically, remnants of the Mongol Empire who keep probing the northern border looking for opportunities. Sound familiar? The Ming emperors essentially reopened the same infrastructure project that had been started, abandoned, restarted, and partially demolished over the previous 15 centuries. Except this time, they had better materials, better engineering, and an absolutely massive bureaucratic state to organize the labor. The Ming Wall, built primarily between 1368 and 1644, stretched approximately 8,850 kilometers. That's roughly 5,500 miles, and used an estimated 1 billion individual fired bricks. 1 billion. If you stack those bricks end to end, they would circle the Earth 3.5 times. The bricks themselves weren't cheap. Unlike the Qin Wall, which was built largely from tamped earth, essentially compressed soil rammed between wooden frames, the Ming engineers used kiln-fired bricks bonded with a mortar made partly from glutinous rice paste, actual sticky rice, mixed into the mortar to increase adhesion. And if that sounds expensive, it's because it was. Researchers at Zhejiang University actually tested Ming Dynasty mortar samples in 2010 and found that the rice-based compounds created bonds stronger than many modern Portland cement mixtures. The Ming weren't just building fast. They were building to last, which means they were building expensive. The total cost of the Ming Wall construction, including materials, labor, military administration, and the maintenance costs spread over 276 years of dynasty rule, has been estimated by Chinese state historians at the equivalent of $360 billion. Other independent economic analyses push that figure closer to $500 billion when you account for the full supply chain infrastructure. Because here's something most people don't think about. The wall wasn't just a wall, it was an ecosystem. At peak Ming operation, approximately 1 million soldiers were permanently stationed along the wall's length. 1 million people whose entire job was to stand on or near a wall. You have to pay those people. You have to feed those people. You have to replace their weapons when they rust, replace their armor when it wears out, replace them when they die of cold or disease or the occasional actual battle. The annual military payroll for the wall garrison during the mid-Ming period was equivalent to roughly $4 billion a year in today's money. Every year, for over 2 centuries. So when you add up the full picture, Qin construction, Han Dynasty extensions, Ming construction, and centuries of maintenance and garrison costs, the total lifetime cost of the Great Wall system, expressed in modern dollars, lands somewhere between $800 billion and $1.2 trillion. To put that in perspective, the entire U.S. interstate highway system, which is 48,000 miles of road and took 35 years to build, cost approximately $560 billion in today's dollars. The Great Wall cost more than twice that for a structure that is, at its widest, about 5 horses wide. Now the question every economics video has to ask: did it work? Here's the honest answer. Kind of, but not really in the way the emperors intended. The Great Wall was supposed to stop nomadic raids, and on a tactical level, it did create friction. It slowed raiders down. It gave garrison soldiers time to signal ahead using the beacon towers. Fires by night, smoke by day, so that defenses could be organized before an attack arrived. Archaeological evidence suggests that small-scale raiding did decrease in areas near completed wall sections. So as a speed bump, it functioned. But as a strategic defense system, the track record is rough. The Xiongnu, the Mongols, the Jurchens, virtually every major nomadic power that seriously wanted to get through the wall, got through the wall. Sometimes by finding gaps, sometimes by simply going around the western end, which was never fully fortified. And most famously, in 1644, the Ming dynasty fell. Not because an enemy army smashed through the wall, but because a Ming general named Wu Songui opened the gates himself, letting the Manchu forces of the Qing dynasty walk through unopposed. A trillion-dollar security system, defeated by an insider threat. But here's the reframe that makes this whole thing more interesting from an economic standpoint. Military historians increasingly argue that the wall's true return on investment was never military. It was economic. The wall created a hard boundary between the agricultural economy of China and the pastoral economy of the steppe. And that boundary was also a customs zone. Every point where the wall had a gate was a point where goods had to be inspected, taxed, and recorded. The wall didn't just keep raiders out, it regulated trade. Silk, tea, tea, porcelain going north, horses, fur, livestock coming south, and the Ming government taxed every transaction. Economists at Peking University estimated in a 2019 paper that during periods of active border trade, particularly during the horse tea trade exchanges of the 15th and 16th centuries, the customs revenue generated along the northern border could cover somewhere between 15 and 25% of the annual garrison costs. That's not a profit, but it's meaningful offset. The wall was quietly functioning as a toll road, a customs barrier, and a trade regulation system simultaneously. It was infrastructure that generated economic activity, not just military security. And that's actually the framework that makes sense of the whole thing. Because no rational accountant would look at a $1 trillion wall that didn't stop the armies it was designed to stop and call it a success. But no rational economist would ignore the fact that the regions directly adjacent to the wall became some of the most commercially active zones in Imperial China. Towns grew up around the gates. Markets developed around the garrisons. The wall created geography, and geography created economic activity, and economic activity created tax revenue that partially justified the next phase of construction. It was a self-perpetuating infrastructure logic, like a highway that justifies itself by creating the suburbs that then justify more highways. The workers who built the wall, and this is the human cost that the numbers don't fully capture, were not paid employees in any modern sense. Conscripted laborers received food rations, basic clothing, and tools. Military laborers received a soldier's stipend. The families of workers who died on the project were sometimes compensated with land grants, sometimes with tax exemptions, sometimes with nothing. Historical estimates of deaths during wall construction vary wildly, from 400,000 in conservative accounts to over 1 million in higher estimates. There's a reason that Chinese have a folk saying that every stone in the Great Wall covers a human bone. And yet the work continued. Dynasty after dynasty, emperor after emperor. Because the alternative, an undefended northern border, was economically worse. The cost of a single successful nomadic raid on a major agricultural region could wipe out multiple years of local grain production. The cost of a permanent Mongol occupation, as China experienced under the Yuan dynasty from 1271 to 1368, was a generation of economic extraction by a foreign ruling class. Relative to those alternatives, even a $1 trillion wall started to look like reasonable insurance. Look, here's the final takeaway from all of this. The Great Wall of China is not the story of an empire that built something magnificent and then watched it pay off. It's the story of 16 centuries of governments making the same calculation over and over again, that the known cost of building was survivable and the unknown cost of not building was not. It's a $1.2 trillion bet on security that never fully paid off militarily, generated unexpected returns economically, consumed an almost incomprehensible share of multiple empires' total resources, and stands today as the most visited paid tourist attraction in China, generating approximately $300 million in annual ticket revenue. Which means the Great Wall of China is now, finally, after 2,000 years, actually making money. It just took a little while to figure out the business model.